Hello, everyone, to the October presentation of the Friends of History First Wednesday lecture series. I am Ben Woodbury with the Friends of History and will serve as your host today. As always, let me start with a few administrative details. As a reminder, all recent past and future First Wednesday online lectures are now available on our Friends of History webpage. I am Ben Woodbury with the Friends of History and will serve as your host today. Just click on the lecture series link at the top of the homepage, and it will take you to. As a reminder, all recent past and future First Wednesday. Our monthly lectures are being provided free of charge on our Friends of History webpage, with the support of the Mexico History Museum. We do, however, accept and encourage donations. These funds will go directly to support the lecture series, and more importantly, all monthly lectures are being provided free of charge on our Friends of History webpage. Should you wish to make a donation, just go to our website and click on the donate button. We do, however, accept and encourage donations. We are looking forward to our November presentation, when our speaker will be Dr. Thomas Chavez, who many of you may recall was the former director of the Palace of Governors here in Santa Fe for 21 years, and has subsequently been writing on a number of issues relating to New Mexico history. On November 3rd, Tom will talk on the Santa Fe Trail, when Horatio Alger met Paco. This is a discussion of the multicultural impact of the Santa Fe Trail throughout its time as the primary link for the United States with Santa Fe and northern Mexico. If you wish to learn more about this lecture and all upcoming lectures, just sign up to be on our mailing list via our webpage or via email at the address cited below. We're also happy to highlight for you two upcoming events co-sponsored by the New Mexico History Museum. On the weekend of 12 to 15 November, the annual Harvey History Weekend will return both online and in person. Once again, there will be lectures on the Fred Harvey phenomenon, as well as the annual Saturday night banquet, combined with an auction of Fred Harvey memorabilia. And of course, activities in Las Vegas, New Mexico as well, into the 15th of November. Most of the activities will be combined online and in-person events. As well, on Sunday, 7 November, the History Museum will show the Harvey Girls movie and host a great talk about movies made in New Mexico with film historian Jeff Berg. His talk will start at 1 p.m. and the movie will start at 2:30 p.m. Look for updates on the History Museum Facebook page. For more information on all Fred Harvey History Weekend events and to register for the talks and dinner tickets, check out the website provided below. All proceeds from the Fred Harvey History Weekend, lectures and activities will go to benefit the New Mexico History Museum. So give it a try. On the same long weekend, the 200th anniversary of the Santa Fe Trail will be celebrated with events in Las Vegas along the route of the Santa Fe Trail and between Las Vegas and Santa Fe, and in Santa Fe itself. The latter include events at both the History Museum and the Museum of Art, as well as reenactments of the arrival of William Becknell in Santa Fe and of the dedication of the DAR marker. These latter two events will be on the plaza. For all the details of the celebration and to make reservations for selected events, go to the webpage you see below. And of course, our November 3rd First Wednesday lecture with Tom Chavez's discussion of the multicultural impacts of the Santa Fe Trail will complement these Santa Fe Trail anniversary celebrations. And now for today's lecture. We're happy to have with us Dr. Robert L. Spude, who is a retired regional historian with the National Park Service. Bob received his BA and MA from Arizona State University and his doctorate from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He is published on ghost towns, mining technology, and is co-author of New Mexico, A History, published by the University of Oklahoma Press in 2013. In 2013 as well, he retired after 35 years as historian and manager with the National Park Service in Alaska and the Rocky Mountain, Southwest, and Intermountain regions. He lives in Santa Fe and enjoys venturing into Mexico's historic landscapes, many of which he will touch on today. Dr. Spude will take us on a tour of some of his favorite ghost towns around the Southwest and discuss their histories, legends, and efforts of preservation. The reality of the boom and bust economy of the territorial period and the resultant ghost towns highlights the shockingly transitory nature of the economic foundations of Southwest society. He will explore the roots of Western American ghost town fascination, their folklore, and related popular culture as sparked by early writers, photographers, and Hollywood through much of the 20th century. Efforts to preserve the mining towns of Shakespeare, Lake Valley, Mogollon, and other relics of lost hope will be highlighted. Following the presentation, Bob will answer any questions you may have. Your questions and comments can be posted at any time in the YouTube or Facebook chat rooms, both during and after the presentation. Upon completion of today's event, the entire presentation will be posted on the Friends of History webpage, as well as on the History Museum's YouTube and Facebook pages. So let us now welcome Bob Spude.
Thanks, Ben. Welcome this opportunity to talk to the Friends group and want to thank a couple of people, especially Billy Garrett, who first invited me to this opportunity, and then for Ben and his staff for coordinating the details of presenting this. There's a number of people over the years that have helped me with this project, from Alaska to the Southwest where I grew up. And I appreciate the opportunity to proselytizing a little bit for preservation, as well as speaking to the choir in a history group. So with that, I'd like to just read my talk to you and begin with that. What is a ghost town? We know inherently what it is, or do we? Well, the Museum of New Mexico Friends Member News magazine for the fall 2021 might say on page 14, quote, "Pandemic closures turned the Santa Fe Plaza into a temporary ghost town." Or the Denver Post last year called the empty shops and vacant streets of the 16th Street Mall a COVID-caused ghost town, end of quote. Others have called an outlet mall between downtown Albuquerque and Santa Fe a ghost town. But we all agree that the Plaza, the 16th Street Mall, and bodegas are not ghost towns. The depiction of this 1942 cartoon, a row of dilapidated, vacant buildings that may, as the caption suggests, have an occupant or two, is what we presume to be true image of a ghost town. But just how one defines a ghost town is open to debate. We'll review the debate, then explore the history of one place doomed to become a ghost town, how easily it can happen, followed by a quick review of the popular culture behind ghost towns and attractions for tourists, and end with 3 sites that have been preserved because of that drive for saving ghost towns as attractions. First, what is a ghost town? Ghost town guidebooks published over the last 70 years are divided on the definition, but in general agreement, there are 4 kinds. One, the authorities say, are the ghostliest, those without any standing remains, like Rosedale in Socorro County. In 1890s gold camp, Rosedale lacks standing structures, but does have rusted cans, derelict machinery, foundations, and a small cemetery, evidence that Rosedale has all but vanished. For ghost town aficionados, these are the most common of sites. On the other extreme, some authorities include one-time ghost towns that have not only revived, but thrived through new economic engines, like the ski industry. Red River, a Taos County ghost town turned ski resort, went through the boom and bust period until the 1930s when recreation took over, then evolved with the ski industry to become a larger community than ever before. Other guidebook writers say that a ghost town can have a small population, but not larger than the former boom town at its height. The community of Cerrillos, with its row of false-fronted shops on the main street, set in its dramatic landscape, and the nearby coal camp of Madrid, both have evidence of their mining prosperity followed by bust. They thrive as attractions to visitors, especially on a weekend during tourist season. Finally, the fourth ghost town type has few residents, living among the ruins and structures that give the feel of a ghost town of its prior self. White Oaks in Lincoln County, with its Main Street buildings, historic school and stores, as well as a few modern businesses like the No Scum Allowed Saloon, is the most reflective of the classic ghost town look. These distinctions, of course, are academic, for the public understands a ghost town to be like our 1942 cartoon image, empty of all but a few people with maybe a ghost or two. The term ghost town implies former activity, perhaps even former greatness, as manifested in decrepit buildings and other ruins. As cultural geographer Richard Francaviglia writes, a ghost town is a place being reclaimed by nature, and we seem to take a personal perverse interest in the aesthetic and symbolism of time marching into and over such forlorn places. Besides the above former mining camp examples, ghost towns can be at or near former military posts or along abandoned railroad lines, or the bypass communities along Route 66, for example. Here today, however, we will focus on mining towns that have become ghost towns, then discuss three such preserve sites: Shakespeare, Lake Valley, and Mogollon. Each of these have the ghost town look within dramatic natural settings. But first, it may help to review as an example camp's history in abbreviated form. Mogollon Ghost Town, one of my favorites, one of the best of the ghost towns you can visit, has a complex yet classic mining camp history, all within the dramatic setting at the edge of New Mexico's Gila Wilderness. It's not the easiest place to reach. From Albuquerque, you drive 4 hours to reserve Catron County, then make a left for a couple more hours on a little used highway along the western border of the state to near the site of Alma, where an ever narrow winding road heads into the Mogollon Mountains. You follow the former path of ore wagons up a steep slope above the valley of Silver Creek into a steep canyon, then round a bend with views of mine spoils and mill tailings, you enter Mogollon. The former mining town is striking as much for its setting as the buildings filled with machinery, old records, stories of quests for riches, and the life of a typical long-lived southwestern mining camp turned ghost town. The beginning of Mogollon dates from when African-American prospector Howard Wilson, using his experience gained in the camps of Nevada and Utah, found the rich ore along Silver Creek near the present site of Mogollon. He staked a claim, named the Maud S after a racehorse, a record-breaking trotter of the time. He hit the elephant cub load ore chamber and sold out for far too little, like most prospectors. His discovery sparked a rush into the district where some 150 claims were staked immediately around the Maud S, a mile by 2 miles. Investors purchased claims, organized mining companies, and during the early 1890s, built ore crushing mills at the best claims, the Maud S, Confidence, Little Fanney, and Last Chance, among others. In September 1890, merchant Mott C. Lamont was appointed postmaster for Mogollon, which is about as good a birth date as any for the town, and a straggly line of wood frame structures erected along Silver Creek. In 1894, a fire destroyed Mogollon, the first of many. Businesses were rebuilt of stone, including the shop of Ludisa Howard, Ludissa was an extraordinary businesswoman who operated a drugstore, confectionery, stationery, and hardware, as well as served as the second postmistress, 1895 to 1907. She owned a share of the imperial claim, which sat beneath the central business district of Mogollon. The patent survey of 1904 details each building and its occupants, mostly saloons, and her post office building, number 12 on this plat. After 1910, production in the Mogollon district rapidly expanded with the perfection of the cyanide process for gold extraction and the introduction of the fuel oil powered electric generators. In the canyon around Fanney Hill were the large mills and cyanide plants, gold factories of the early 20th century that poured bullion into coffers of corporations in New York, Boston, and Chicago. During the 1911 to 1917 period, when the district produced over $1 million to $2 million per year, the largest gold producing district in the new state, the population of Mogollon district reached 2,000. Early reminiscences of the boom years recount tales of stage robberies as well as unsuccessful attempts to steal bullion poured into unmanageable 200-pound bars. The robbery of the company store, the feud over local vice, including brothels, added color to the tales. Mine accidents rivaled the flu epidemic of 1918 in their impact to the camp. The contrasting reminiscences of a woman who grew up in Mogollon in the 1920s and 1930s, when it was more a company town with one big consolidated operation, reveals pictures of a peaceful community with school activities, winter fun, and family outings, besides visiting with her father, the company assayer, in town. In 1940, one of Mogollon's last years of operation, photographer Russell Lee, fortunately for us, documented the camp and the Little Fanney mine and mill, the hoist crew, miners, mill hands, town businesses, homes, and events. Mogollon was prosperous and its future appeared assured. But when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and the United States entered World War II, the federal government ordered all non-essential industries closed, including gold mining, to focus on war work. On June 23, 1942, the Little Fanney Mill whistle blew for the last time, operation shut down, and almost overnight, Mogollon became a ghost town. I'll return to Mogollon in a bit, but we need to review some of the context for New Mexico ghost towns. The collapse of mining towns highlights the not shockingly transitory nature of the economic foundations of the Southwest society. The pace of change in business was and remains extraordinarily swift. Opportunities can shift almost overnight and old industries fail. Workers lost paychecks while merchants, liverymen, mine managers, and bankers would lose status because of any number of events: a recession, the winds of political change, the collapse of mineral markets, or the arrival of a disruptive new technology like fuel oil for coal. The ghost town creation story, boom, bust, lingering, then revival, and final bust, was replayed across the Southwest during the 19th and 20th century. These abandoned towns, though developed a distinct narrative and folk culture because of the arrival of the automobile tourist, as well as the influences of Hollywood and other arts to create mythic images of ghost towns. Even the term ghost town originated in the American West. To review popular culture, one begins with the contested claim of where and what is the last best ghost town. How many last best ghost towns are there? Who doesn't have a favorite that stands out from the many vanished cities across the Western landscape? Certainly, Bodie, California has its adherents, as it should. The former silver then gold site situated in the high desert near the Nevada line is probably the most photographed of the 19th century mining centers. Its observers and describers range from echo warrior Ed Abbey to the contributions by authors in Sunset magazine. Bodie symbolizes our culture's desire to see time stop. It is preservationist theater, and its landscape is so provocative that the drama needs no actors, only a stage of deserted buildings filled with artifacts. We can point to other similar sites as Bodie State Park. My other favorites include Bannock, Montana, South Bass City, Wyoming, Animas Forks, Colorado, Kennecott, Alaska, and more abandoned places that have been preserved. This is an odd situation, places preserved to attract visitors to not really abandoned, but conceptually abandoned places. They are attractions because of their abandonment. But what these places have in common is their intervention of some person or entity or community or of similar spirits to make sure that the remains of the former camps last another century. These ghost towns are no more abandoned than the ruins of Pompeii. Some entity, person, or organization has taken on the responsibility to husband their care. Their continuance, even in the stage as defined by Bodie State Park managers as arrested decay. Ghost town tourism rose in numbers as post-war America discovered these, quote, carcasses of lost hopes, end quote, across the American West. Obviously, the automobile brought about the quick access unheard of in the boom days. Weekend adventurers were lured by articles in a host of magazines and newspaper Sunday supplements. The ghost town, in my estimation, is a 20th century phenomena created as much by writers, photographers, and artists, and Hollywood, as the grand tour purveyors of 19th century Europe created romantic ideals of the Greek landscape. We have always had abandoned places, but the 20th century gave us ghost towns as attractions. This can be traced to the 1890s publication of travel book guide by a Borks company, offering visitors to Death Valley such sites as dead cities, which were ghosts of former themselves. Sports journalist and movie critic Charles Van Loan brought national attention to ghost cities phenomena by a series of essays in the Saturday Evening Post, part of a travel log for automobilists who might venture across the continent to attend San Francisco's Panama Pacific Exposition in 1915-16. John Muir, Mark Twain, earlier writers had written about abandoned places, about the ruins of the mining camps, but not as attractions. Van Loan was the first to write of ghost towns as places automobilists should go to see the passing of the West. Van Loan's ghost cities even attracted the editor of the Santa Fe, New Mexican newspaper, and commented on the attraction of these ghost towns. Van Loan included Bodie, California, which provided an outline history for later ghost town writers. Of the discoveries and booms, the bad man and the fancy ladies, he created the outline for the stories that would be followed by later writers into the present century. Ghost towns, or the term ghost town, did not appear in literature until after Van Loan. Then the volume of stories about ghost towns dramatically increased with the 1920s. The Southern California Automobile Association, of course, led the dissemination of such travel stories in its Touring Topics magazine, a style of ghost town articles that also follow in such magazines as Arizona Highways and the New Mexico magazine. Even this last July, the New Mexico magazine had a series of great essays on ghost towns. Hollywood in the 1930s gave us the stereotypical image of the abandoned Main Street in a number of movies, some with ghost town in their title, most not. For example, in The Bride Came COD, James Cagney and Bette Davis appeared in a comedy partly set in a desert ghost town after their plane crash landed. The sole resident, an old prospector and all-around handyman, recounts the tales of Bonanza City. The imprint of the image of place, of the modern traveler outsider wandering into the town no longer on a map, is spiced up with romance. Cagney marries Bette Davis in the end, and the tale of the rediscovery of the mother lode to revive the town. Our image of the ghost town, the false fronts along a dusty street, is as much from Hollywood as the real thing discovered by artists, writers, and later tourists. Well-known artists, photographers like Ansel Adams, Elliot Porter, and Todd Webb discovered the stained wood, decayed wood window sills, and twisted remains of the ghost towns, especially after the 1930s. Paul Strand captured some of Red River during the 1930s as well, when it was a ghost town. And nearby, another Federal Securities Administration photographer, John Collar, photographed Elizabethtown's last days as this rustic church image portrays. Photographs, the silver screen, and ashcan school artists captured the romanticized remnants that post-war American tourists would seek out. Publication of ghost town guidebooks for this audience would begin with several pioneer books in the 1940s and 50s by artists Muriel Sybil Woolley, journalist photographer Nell Merbarger, and photographer Lambert Florin. Woolley and Florin wrote a stack of books which included New Mexico ghost towns, photographs, and their standard tales. These books flooded the market in the next decade. The overwhelming number of publications in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s about ghost towns included history, travelogue, and myth, and several became bestsellers, especially for university presses. New Mexico became the subject for a series of guidebooks between the 60s and the 70s. Sort of the middle books in that image shows the variety of shape, form, and authors. They included engineer, photographer, English teacher, journalist, and ghost town hobbyists. Each book was slightly different, but captured over 100 different places in New Mexico, then in the glory as ghost towns. But the fat guidebooks, numbers of them surprisingly still in print, describe an American West of the 1940s, 70s, not of today. Most sites have been transformed, most to total loss. As mentioned above, the best ghost towns that remain as accessible attractions while retaining the look of the past have been preserved by some entity. Reviewing the successes of preservation as well as the challenges of some of these sites help us better understand their past and ours. Historic preservation has become a mainstay in the various methods we use to understand the past. The preservation of historic structures and sites is a commonplace activity throughout the United States, though some regions, particularly New England and the Tidewater South, have been more successful than the others. Too often in New Mexico, historic structures like this stone building in Elizabethtown were lost without some entity or someone intervening. In the Southwest, historic preservation of ghost towns saw the first actions during the post-World War II years. In our allotted time, we'll focus on 3 mining camps turned ghost towns, the efforts at Shakespeare, Lake Valley, and Mogollon. They'll highlight various methods used to save the fabric of the late 19th century and early 20th century era and tell its stories, albeit in sometimes myth-creating fashion. Nationally, historic preservation grew with the linking of a new generation of philanthropists and the popularization of history. Quote, outdoor museums, end quote, were a new concept at the beginning of the 20th century with the preservation of buildings and artifacts in cultural landscapes in historic villages. The Southwest had one of its first imitators in Shakespeare, though its owners had a tighter purse than others. During the 1930s Depression years, Frank Hill, a Texas rancher with his wife Rita, bought a spread south of Lordsburg. Their daughter, Jana Lou, later recalled they were taken with the decaying near ghost town of Shakespeare on their ranch land and began stabilizing some of the historic buildings. One local old-time resident of Shakespeare, Emma Muir, inspired them further about the town's history from its time as an overland trail stop to a boom town under the 1870s banker named Ralston, and then renamed as Shakespeare by an English mine superintendent enamored with the bard, and it would cause the town's revival in 1878. Silver ore from the surrounding pyramid range supported a boom and then bust economy, which terminated with the financial panic of 1893. Muir inspired the Hills to want to share the story of Shakespeare with a wider audience. And in the 1940s, the city of Lordsburg's Chamber of Commerce joined to help, quote, resurrect the ghost, as it were, to publicize it as a tourist attraction. This concept of creating an attraction of a declining community in the Southwest is best exemplified by Shakespeare's contemporary Tombstone, Arizona, which was well on its way to become a ghost town when it lost the county seat in 1929. Tombstone's revival was tied to its legendary past, which was marketed during the post-war tourist boom. In essence, the popularization of the Wild West tale of the shootout near the OK Corral resurrected Tombstone. The Hills of Shakespeare followed a similar plan to attract tourists, including tales of bad guys, while creating an outdoor historic experience based on the ghost town's lengthy history. With an unmatched zeal, the Hills and their friends created what one writer called, quote, the most authentic 19th century New Mexico ghost, end quote. In Shakespeare, one could walk its boardwalk in front of adobe and wood stores and experience the past in scale and texture and by absorption. The Hills did not have a master plan, but a general feel for restoring the town. They stabilized the oldest buildings, including the Hotel Stratford upon Avon Street, restored the general store, reconstructed infill structures, and installed static exhibits, such as the assay office. The few reconstructed buildings contained displays, while part of one building was remodeled to serve as a residence. On special occasions, they hosted tourists to reenactments of specific events in the town's history. Reenactors in period costume, led by Jan Lou, relived the 19th century West within this historic landscape of the ghost town. The Hills published pamphlets, histories, brochures for tourists, and in 1973 saw to the listing of Shakespeare Ghost Town on the National Register of Historic Places. After her parents died, Janaloo Hill, with husband Manny Howe, continued operations at the ghost town. A 1997 fire destroyed the general store and its rare collections inside. Looking to the future, Janaloo offered the ghost town to the state and approached the New Mexico legislature, which funded a study of Shakespeare as a potential state monument. Probably one of the worst assessments of a historic site I have read. The report concluded that the site was duplicate of other monuments and thus did not meet the needs of the state monuments program. Apples and oranges. Others, like historian Mark Simmons, argued that Shakespeare was an unspoiled relic of Western life and warrants consideration of recognition. Janaloo died in 2005, but Manny Howe continued the operation. Today, a nonprofit group has helped Shakespeare weather the pandemic and has reopened its daily tours for a modest fee. A friends group hosts a web page, Facebook page, and other internet links. Federal ownership of the lands around former mining camps in the Southwest is common. Often, mining camp residents failed to perfect title to their lands, which reverted back to land management agencies. Usually either the Forest Service or BLM, Bureau of Land Management, is responsible for the lands, but occasionally other entities under the state or federal government administer the lands as well. This posed a dilemma for preservationists with an occasional success. One such example is Lake Valley. In the Black Range of New Mexico, a series of gold and silver camps rose quickly during the boom of the 1870s and 80s, including Kingston, Hillsboro, and Chloride. Boom towns housed an assortment of men and women, a total regional population of maybe 5,000, depending on the source. Lake Valley began as the most spectacular of New Mexico's silver camps with the discovery of the Bridal Chamber, a $1 million ore body near the surface. A mill was built and a rail spur off the Santa Fe Railroad followed the boom where the stock was sold to Easterners, from well-known poet Walt Whitman to Yale professor of geology Benjamin Silliman. When the speculative bubble bust, the operation contracted to a shadow itself by 1890. Lake Valley lingered with a few small revivals in the 20th century. The last few residents operated an oil distribution service and has caretaker for the quiet mining operation. In 1994, the last residents moved away. This town site of Lake Valley was never patented, remained within the public domain. The Bureau of Land Management, the agency responsible for managing the lands, began an active heritage preservation component that identified significant landscapes of interest to the touring public. The Lake Valley Byway and the Lake Valley Town site and the vacant buildings of the ghost town became the focus of interpretation studies and stabilization. Under federal historic preservation law, the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, as amended, the BLM evaluated the significance of the landscape in the ghost town and contracted with archaeologists to evaluate the remains of the once boomtown site. Working with the State Historic Preservation Office, BLM managers, and with the assistance of the National Park Service Preservation Team, led in the stabilization of buildings on the town site and rehabbed the historic school into an interpretive center. Interpretive plaques were developed and placed at distinctive points. The state's Abandoned Mine Lands program also assisted with coordinated mine closures, as well as published a respected history of Lake Valley Mining District by mining historian Homer Milford. The Lake Valley Heritage Program of BLM is an outstanding example of what can be done within the realm of sensitive ghost town preservation. It is a success, as is the other nearby efforts of groups in the other Black Range communities, almost ghost towns, but very much alive at Hillsborough, Kingston, and Chloride. The recent restoration of key buildings at Chloride by an individual also shows how a sensitive touch in managing historic structures can help retain the ghost town feel with other historic landscapes. In 1951, Muriel Sybil Woolley toured New Mexico collecting information and making sketches for her book, The Bonanza Trail, Ghost Towns and Mining Camps of the West, published in 1953. She wrote, quote, "From the time I first planned to visit New Mexico, everyone to whom I talked said, 'Don't miss Mogollon. It's a real ghost town, the best one you'll find,' end quote. As mentioned earlier, Mogollon had become an almost instant ghost town with the closure of its mines during World War II. By the time of Woolley's visit, the few residents sought an alternative means of economic survival, which led them to the unwritten plan to create an historic attraction for tourists. John and Nellie Artcher were among the first to see an opportunity and open an art gallery and a sort of a museum. The relocation of other artists, notably Bill Rokesee of Ohio, coincided with an increase of interest in visiting ghost towns by not just New Mexicans, but people throughout the country. By the 1970s, during the summers, Artcher counted an estimated 500 people daily visiting the Mogollon ghost town. At Mogollon, preservation was a personal effort. People bought the old stores for homes and small businesses and rehabilitated them for modern use while retaining the ghost town ambiance. Rusted cars and large equipment along the road into town added to the feel. The 1973 filming of a spaghetti western added a couple new odd-looking buildings, becoming a favorite of photographers, even though they dated from the late 20th century, not late 19th. Information about the town was included in most ghost town guides. In 1977, Bill Rokesee published the Mogollon Diary, a compilation of early news clips, excerpts of diaries and reminiscence, and events in the town. While social life and characters were found in the published reminiscence of former residents, such as H.A. Hoover's Tales from the Bloated Goat Saloon and Jan Sherman's Hypnotizing Chickens and other stories, My Adventures of the Mogollon. Residents from this generation were leaders in discussions about protecting Mogollon in the long term, maintaining its dirt road, the limited use of street lighting, and other efforts to save the historic feel, which is a continued battle between outside improvement versus keeping that historic look. The number of fires that threatened the town continued after the 1970 and has also given cause for concern. To ensure future preservation, the community debated what level of involvement by outsiders. A draft nomination to the National Register of Historic Places was followed by a proposal to look at Mogollon as a potential state park. Early in 1973, state park planner David King met with an old-fashioned Catron County shootout. Mogollon residents opposed any state park or state involvement in their community. The proposal quickly disappeared. The continued fear of floods and fires required close involvement with managers of the adjacent forests and to learn from catastrophic events elsewhere. For example, the ghost town of Bland, a contemporary of Mogollon, southeast of Santa Fe, went up in flames during the Las Conchas wildfire of 2011. Floods and fires have continued to threaten Mogollon over the past decade. The success of Mogollon's survival depended on public support fostered by some energetic visionaries. The focus is the preservation of Mogollon has been on the structures and the creation of an historic environment within the dramatic landscape. The opposition to the creation of a state park is understandable, but unfortunate given that every other Western mining state has at least one former ghost town dedicated to the preservation of that period of the state's history. The three ghost towns, Shakespeare, Lake Valley, and Mogollon, provide examples of the varied efforts for preserving such historic sites, either by individuals or government entities. The Hill family at Shakespeare and the community of Mogollon should be lauded for their efforts. At Lake Valley, the Bureau of Land Management, a major presence in New Mexico, worked closely with various groups for its successful preservation effort. Ghost towns or abandoned places will continue to attract their adherents. A saunter down the boardwalk over Silver Creek in Mogollon is an act in which the visitor can absorb that ephemeral mining camp world. And in the 21st century, as the West population expansion grows and isolated abandoned villages disappear, the quest to seek such sites will continue. Let's hope the preservationists succeed and the ghost towns we enjoy, however defined, endure through another century. Thank you.
Well, Bob, I want to thank you. That was most informative. Before we get into the Q&A, I did want to let our audience know that we did run into a small technical problem in the introduction. There was about a 30-second split there. That will be corrected when we post it all full time. So you're sure to get all the information you need for the upcoming lecture with Tom Chavez in November. Bob, really enjoyed that talk. I not only in terms of providing just such a great overview of ghost towns throughout the region and the West, but particularly here in the Southwest, and with an appropriate focus on the efforts to preserve many of these towns. Each story is, as you made quite clear, is unique in itself, and we commend all of those people who have took it upon themselves to preserve a bit of the Old West, certainly on the mining side, in their efforts, and also with the small groups of friends of these organizations, which continue to support and advocate for their preservation and their historical record. I was struck personally by your presentation complements very well a talk we had back in July with Chris Huggard and Tom Humble on Santa Rita. Of course, that story is quite unique in its own right, because Santa Rita is now a town in the sky, as they like to say, having been ultimately the people moved and the town consumed in the open pit mine that has been there for years. So I wondered if you had any sense in terms of the total number of ghost towns that exist. Has there been a catalog of sorts? I realize, again, it gets into definitions, but I'd be interested to any insights you might have to offer on that.
Yeah, and it's exactly that. How do you define them? And so many people look at the standard image of structures and a place to walk through, like at Mogollon and Lake Valley and Shakespeare, but literally hundreds of these little mining boom towns would pop up and disappear before you knew it. So those are almost innumerable over the last century and a half or so. The thing that stands out, there's about 10 to 20 that will appear in any publication that highlights ghost towns, like the special issue of in July of the New Mexico magazine, and on New Mexico True's webpage, and those Black Range towns, Lake Valley, Chloride, Hillsborough, and Kingston will always be there. Mogollon, and there's a real attraction to White Oak too in Lincoln County. So the numbers in the ghost town books, though, is about 100. Is what they'll describe.
Yes, yes. We've let me check in. We do have a question. Will the southern road into Mogollon, destroyed by flood, be restored?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, one of our participants was wondering, apparently the southern road to Mogollon was flooded and destroyed. And the question was whether there was any effort to restore that.
Yeah, and that is the problem. Mogollon has both fire and flood just because it's right there in that steep canyon. And there is a lot of interest in seeing that reconnection just because of access. And it's related not only to use of the road, but it's if there's a fire of having a escape route, if you will. It's a very tight valley and very isolated, which is part of the attraction of Mogollon.
Right. And I don't see any further questions. Perhaps you have some additional comments at this point that you'd like to add.
Yeah, one thing that I've noticed, and I when I was at grad school in Arizona State University, author of Ghost Town books came to me and asked if I would write a couple. So I wrote Central Arizona Ghost Towns, a little pamphlet. And I've been immersed in the topic since, the 60s and academically since the 70s. But the one thing I'm seeing changing is the definition of places we like to visit. And the term abandoned place, which is much older than the term ghost town, is sort of a nomenclature shift in how we define places we like to go explore, that there's a sense of loss. So the number of books on abandoned places with abandoned place in the title are increasing and include places like the Albuquerque Rail Yard as part of the abandoned places. A very good recent book on that theme, abandoned places, which they include ghost towns. So in some ways, the era of the ghost town may be passing. And we're seeing an earlier term recapturing, the abandoned village, the abandoned place, the term that was used in Europe and early America. And then the West gave us the ghost town. So.
Yeah. Well, personally, I'm very excited to hear that, that people are continuing to be interested, whether they be abandoned or
Right.
simply ghost towns, and just as historical sites in general. With all the distractions we have today, it's good to see folks and able to get out and see these places and recall some of our history.
Yeah.
On that.
And if you can support these grassroots efforts, a lot of folks with their little museums in these communities, survive by donations or just support of their business, and that's always helpful. So.
Yes. Well, again, thank you, Bob. It's really been a pleasure sharing this experience with you. In closing, I'd just like to remind our folks to again check out the information on the Fred Harvey weekend and on the Santa Fe Trail bicentennial. Those events occurring there on the 12th to the 15th of November. And check out our web pages. There'll be continuing information available and access to the websites there. And then if folks would like to make a donation to our effort here with the Friends of History, do log into our website, friendsofhistorynm.org, and it would be much appreciated. And finally, just a final reminder that we will see you all in November for Tom Chavez as he speaks on the Santa Fe Trail when Horatio Alger met Paco.